There we go. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining me. I am super excited because normally this time of year, we're done with all of our events. We're focused fully on the holiday season, making sure you guys get all the books you need. But today we're doing something really, really different. I am joined with Christina Rosso. So Christina Rosso, she, her, is a writer and bookstore owner living outside of Philadelphia with her bearded husband and rescue pup. In 2016, she received her MFA in Creative Writing and MA in English from Arcadia University. Christina is the author of Creole Conjure, Maudlin House, 2021, and She is a Beast, APEP Publications, 2020. Her writing has been nominated for the Best of the Net, Small Fictions, and the Pushcart Prize. For more information, visit Christina-Rosso, ROSSO.com, or find her on Twitter at Rosso, two S's again, underscore Christina. So Christina, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. So normally, for people who have watched these before, we spend a whole bunch of time and we just talk about the books, and we're going to do that too. But also, if you listen during the bio, Christina is also a bookstore owner. So we're going to nerd out about that for a second and have a very quick therapy session where we cry together. It'll be fun.
It'll be very cathartic for both of us.
Exactly. But before we do that, let's talk about the real reason that people are here. Let's talk about this book, this awesome book. So this first question I ask is usually much harder for people because I always tell them, look, as a person working in a bookstore, my job is to sell books, and so I have an elevator pitch for all of my books. I can just go, I can sell it to you in 10 seconds or less. And I asked this author who's never had to sell their book after their publication, their meeting with their publisher, how would you sell this? And then we sit there for a minute and they try and think. But you work in the bookstore, so I'm going to kick it to you anyway. How would you sell this book? What's your elevator pitch?
Well, it's, as we were talking about before we went live, it's hard for me to sell my own book, but I tell people that this is a book of interconnected short stories that follows femme-bodied or non-binary characters trying to make it in a world that is run by the patriarchy where they're battling literal forces of evil. So if you like mythology, fairy tales, folklore, and a mashup of all of those, as well as horror, this is the book for you.
Absolutely. And as someone who likes all of those things, this was very much the book for me. When I was talking with our event coordinator about, doing this event, she always makes sure to get me a copy of the book so I can read it and be ready. And I didn't even open it. I just looked at the cover and read the name and went, oh, I'm going to like this one. This is going to be fun. And it completely was. I really, really appreciated all the different ways in which you sort of talked about, showcased different kinds of transition between different, beings in some cases, between different places in other cases. When I think a lot about New Orleans, obviously I think most of us also, we think about voodoo, we think about, the Loa, and a big part of that is the idea of psychopompery, the transitioning beings from one place to another, and that's definitely something that I see throughout your book. And you mentioned, I think really brilliantly, that it's a collection of short stories that are connected to make this narrative. What was the experience like writing that?
I feel like the best way to describe it is a fever dream. So I had really no plan when I was writing this book. I started writing the very first story in the collection, Alligator Blues, the first time I went to New Orleans in 2015. And at the time I was a graduate student and I was taking a class on young adult fiction. And I would not say that this book now, today, is young adult, but I started with, a just turned 18 character that is reminiscent of Belle from Beauty and the Beast. And instead of a beast, it's an alligator. And so I had this idea, and I was like, I like this. But I didn't finish the story. I just kind of drafted a part of it for this class, and then I put it away for a while. And then about a year or so later, I had the summer off from adjuncting. I was a writing instructor, and I said, you know what? I'm not working this summer. I've saved my money. I'm going to take the next 3 months, and I'm going to just explore this idea and see if I can write a book. And so it was really crazy because I actually wrote it in the order you see it in today,
Really?
With no plan. I just was like, Yeah, I had a notebook of some of the folklore and some of the fairy tale and mythology that I was interested in covering, but a lot of it really unfolded in this organic fashion. I was writing every single day, which was amazing. I didn't edit a thing. I just sat there for several hours a day, more than several hours a day, and just got it down and lost my mind a little bit trying to create this really, I think, unique mythos that also has familiar touches from fairy tales, mythology, and folklore. So yeah, I say fever dream is the best way to describe the writing process for this.
That sounds awesome. I mean, the writing, the fever dream less so, but the creation process sounds super cool. So you mentioned that there's a lot of different mythologies sort of woven in here. I know it may be hard to pick, but do you have a favorite sort of thing that you go, this was really cool when it came up, and I was super excited to have this? Because for me, and I know we mentioned it a little bit before, the siren was probably my favorite thing to sort of see come about. And I have more thoughts on that in a minute, but first, do you have a favorite one?
Well, the siren definitely, Isabel, my siren character, definitely has a special place in my heart. I have a running joke that I can't write a book without a siren in it because I have a siren story in my chapbook. She is a beast as well. So I definitely, in terms of folklore and fairy tales, am very much obsessed with water creatures and the different creation myths for sirens and mermaid-like creatures. So she was always going to be in there. But I think this one story that I got to have a lot of fun with is my Lady Meridicide story, which is my female Bluebeard. And Bluebeard is my current favorite fairy tale. It always changes, but I wanted to flip the script and instead of having a murderous husband, have a murderous wife, and just got to really just go there and be ridiculous. And so she was a lot of fun to write. So I feel like she's my current favorite.
Yeah. The whole opening scene where she's practicing crying and she's getting ready because she knows, like, oh, my friends will be over and here's how everyone's going to react and I have to make sure that I'm ready for them all in different ways, was so cool to read. One of the things that I liked about it, and again, you touched on this as well a little earlier, was the idea of these women making their way through a world that is hurtful, that is designed to be set up against them, that is antagonistic. And as much as I can, because obviously, being a cis white man, I can't understand the struggles in the same way that obviously you can, it felt, in reading that, I could feel that anger and that sort of, unfairness is the right word, but that unfairness coming through. And it made me as a reader sympathetic to people where if you read about it on paper, she murders all of her husbands, that's what she does, you'd go, that's a bad person, but you read about it and you root for them in a weird, or at least I did, maybe I'm a little twisted, but I rooted for her in a weird sort of twisted way. Was that intentional? And if so, how did you make that an emotion that conveyed?
Yeah, I definitely, in all of my work, and something that I've really been focused on in the last year is the idea of the monstrous female. So I teach a series of workshops, and I've been teaching one this year looking specifically at mythology and the monstrous female in that. But I think this book, so much of it is about the monstrous female and how often these figures become monstrous to protect themselves. They become monstrous because of something a man did to them. And so I always am thinking about this idea of what makes someone a monster, and where's the human element to it. So Lorelai, yes, on paper, she murders her husbands, right? But she, believes that she has a higher purpose. She's not just marrying them to kill them. She marries them, and then they reveal themselves in her view, right? They reveal themselves to be guilty of one of the 7 deadly sins. And then she is ridding the world, she's protecting the world from these men, right? But she also is conflicted in this story because she has a new husband that she doesn't want to kill. She knows he's flawed, but she wants to make it work. And so that was really important for me, that she wasn't just like, I'm just going to murder him from the get-go. You have to make it more complicated than that. You have to make her more conflicted. But what you mentioned, Drew, of like the anger that you can feel like, I hope that like vibrates from the page, right? Because as a person who's femme-bodied, who's been in abusive relationships, who's been even just around men or other people that haven't been kind to me, there is an anger that just exists below the surface. And I am like a very non-confrontational person in real life. I don't like violence, and so on the page, it's where I get to play. It's where I get to explore that side of myself that I both feel I can't do in everyday life nor want to, but also that I feel like, and I've talked to a lot of women that feel similarly, that we have to keep our emotions in check. And so I wanted to have a character who is so good at playing the system, but she also allows herself to release some of that tension as well.
No, again, the going back to my personal favorite, which is the Siren, hearing or reading about, I say hearing about because it's in my head, I guess, but reading about what happened to her, with her boyfriend in particular, it was one of those, I was like, I need to take a break. I'm going to sit it down for a second. I know it's going to be okay. I'm going to come back to that because it's not, again, me as a man reading this as much and trying not to, put my own spin on it too much, but for me, I guess the impactful part wasn't just the fact that he was, sorry, small spoiler. I try to keep these relatively spoiler light for everybody, but I apologize. I'm going to spoil a little bit. And a slight trigger warning as well. It wasn't just that he was abusive towards her, which he was. It was the moment where, I don't want to say she accepted it, but it was where she sort of was like, well, I guess this is what we're going to do, so I'll tell him this is what I like and it'll be okay. That was just heartbreaking, and I think that for so many people that has to be such a relatable thing. The specifics of that event, maybe not. I hope not to too many people. But the idea of, this is something I don't like, this is something I'm uncomfortable with, but for this other person, okay, then I make this. That was just so heartbreaking to read, and made the other stuff that happens with her, you just root for her. You're like, yeah, eat that guy. Eat him. Just eat him all. Don't even care. He deserves to be eaten.
Yeah, Siren, so that story and my other stories based on Sirens are mixing the lore behind the creation of them. And it is always a violent transformation, either where they are, literally drowned by their father for getting pregnant out of wedlock, whether it's a partner that murders them. There's always this transformation of shedding, your human skin and becoming this seductive siren that you see time and time again in mythology. And so that's something that's really interesting for me to play with. And she had to be broken to that point, as horrible as it is, to then make her transformation feel justified. And I think too that a story like that, now even though I wrote this before the current time we're living in, something that I've been exploring as I've been teaching workshops and I've been writing some new stuff during the pandemic, is that working in this genre, working with fairy tales, working in a fantasy world, that we've all learned in some capacity what it's like to be confined in the past 2 years, right? We've been stuck. And I couldn't change my situation, right? So many of us we can't change COVID, right? But I can change this character's story. I can give her a happy ending. I can liberate her. Now, in the case of Isabel, it's that she's a man-eating siren, Yeah. But it's a lot of fun to write, and it also is liberating from a female perspective, and also as a person just existing in the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned something earlier about sort of the. Correct me, please, because I know I'm not getting it right. It was like monstrous women or female. So the work.
The monstrous female, yeah.
The monstrous female. Thank you. I read a long time ago sort of the creation myth of Medusa and how that comes about, and how I'm seeing it now, at least on Pinterest anyway, because apparently I follow the right Pinterests. But the sort of reversal of that myth, where it's instead of Perseus holding her head, it's her holding Perseus's head. Do you think, the timeliness of what you're writing is very much in vogue right now? Which is a horrible question. Let me do that a little better. Do you feel like what you're writing is very timely with what we're all kind of I think, experiencing culturally right now in some ways.
Yeah, I definitely think so. It's really interesting because during my graduate programs, I did both a master's in lit and an MFA at the same time. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. And it was during that program that I really started down the path of exploring feminist fairy tales. I discovered The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, which is my Bible, and it transformed me as a person and as a writer and as a feminist. And the thing that was so interesting is that I was reading these incredible texts and I was starting to explore with it in my own creative writing, and nowhere would publish me. I was submitting stuff, and I would say like 9 months after I got out of grad school was the first time I had a queer Snow White retelling that got published. And then I had an original fairy tale published that made it into my first chapbook. And then it just kept coming, and I started also writing nonfiction work, and that was around the time that the Me Too movement really, even though it had already existed, it really took off. And so I feel like in the last 5 or so years, people now want to read the kinds of stories that I've always been interested in writing and that I've been writing, but it's not always the easiest stuff to read or to think about, and it can be very triggering. But it can also be really empowering and cathartic. And so I do think that these kinds of feminist reimagining, I mean, Circe came out, and exploded when Madeline Miller wrote that. I love that book, right? And now we're seeing, Ariadne, and there's an Electra coming out, and there is definitely, I think people are clamoring for these stories because of the political climate that we're in, because of the pandemic that we're living in. And I think it's also interesting too, because I do a lot of, I'm actually working on a nonfiction project looking at the archetype of the witch in folklore. And if you look at the witch throughout history and when that archetype has become popular, it's every time there's some political, like big political unrest. And then, and you see in the last 5 or so years that like witchcraft has blown up again, right? People are hexing the patriarchy. People are diving into tarot and self-care. And so I think all of this connects because the witch is also a typically femme-bodied figure, a monstrous female figure that's persecuted and has been oppressed, but can also be a symbol of strength and perseverance.
Sure. Do you think it also could have something, have a piece of it be that, during times when things are not restful, during a time of unrest, we sort of look at the current system that's got us here and just go, well, this didn't work. What other options are there? And I had a really good friend of mine once, we were talking about, paganism, and in particular with Wicca, and I made a comment, I said, yeah, it seems like every woman I know at some point had a phase they went through where they did the witch thing, and then sometimes they kept with it and sometimes they didn't, and they went, yeah, of course, because this is the structures of power that were available to women didn't exist, so we had to go and make our own to some extent. And it makes me wonder, because it's a valid point, right now, you even lumped tarot and self-care in together. If I had been talking with someone, if someone tried to talk with me about self-care 7 years ago, I'd have been like, yeah, okay, I get it. Be nice to myself, I got it. Now I'm like, no, self-care is super important. Like, everyone should absolutely be taking care of themselves. And I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that, like, many of us feel like the current system, however you want to phrase that, has kind of let us down in a lot of ways. And so we're looking around and just going, well, then if this isn't working, maybe this works, trying to find something else that can be helpful. And I think that absolutely this is something that can be. My little 10-second soapbox rant. I'm very sorry, people of the internet. But bringing it back to task a little bit with this book. So when you're selling it, because there are a lot of things in here that can be very triggering, is that something that you kind of think about? Do you tell people when they're looking at it, like, hey, just so you know, there's some stuff in here, or does that you just go, look, they can read the back, they can figure this out? What's your take? So,
as we were talking about earlier, I'm still navigating selling my own book, especially because I feel like that's just not something I naturally do. And when my chapbook came out, that was at the beginning of the pandemic, and so I never saw people in person. So I didn't have to. I'm great at selling myself online. I can do that. And so, this book has been out just about a month now, and so I'm still navigating my comfort level of being like, hey, I have this thing that I wrote it, and let me tell you about it, But we have kind of put it in a few different places at A Novel Idea, and one of them is in the horror section. And so if someone picks it up or tells me they like horror and they pick it up, I feel like I don't have to give them content warnings, because horror folks, I have horror aficionados in the group that I'm like, this book's about cannibalism, and they're like, put it in my cart, There's no cannibal. Well, if you count the siren as human, she does eat people. But it's definitely something that I do, especially as I've been doing readings and things. I'm really mindful of A, what sections I'm reading, and B, if I am reading something. Even, I did a reading recently where I read part of Lady Murdercide, and she's murdering Good Time Ray at the end, and who's not her husband, but it's a fun part.
Yeah.
But it gets very bloody, right? And so, that was something that I gave content warnings for. But typically, once I describe the book to people, I think they have a pretty clear sense that, like, this is going to be weird and magical and probably bloody. And I forget that I recently had a review of the book, and I'm trying to think if I can find the line, because it was the most perfect line about my writing. They called my book a murder ballad. That's what it was.
Ooh, okay.
It was like, Creole Commander is not for the faint of heart. This murder ballad, something, something, something. And I was like, you understand me. And also, just if people are familiar with my work, they know that it's always feminist. I definitely write feminist revenge work. And literally some of my favorite, I'm a big horror buff, and my literal favorite TV show is Hannibal. So I also have an obsession with serial killers. So if I can include them in my writing, I will. But it's definitely something that I'm navigating of, like, who do I sell this to? And, as my family has started telling people about the book, they're like, oh, I'll buy it for my kids. I'm like, maybe a mature, like, 16-year-old, but no, like, we need to talk about the content of it and whether that's appropriate or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's change gears a little bit and talk less about the book and more about you, the writer. So you already sort of said that this just came out as a fever dream. So I would say you're definitely less of a plotter and more of a just flow of thought kind of writer. I think someone probably much smarter than me has better terms for that, but that's what I got. Do you find, you said you didn't edit it at all. Did you go back and make revisions, or was it just on the page and now it's here?
Oh, I spend a lot of time editing. Okay. I just, so I'm an extremely type A planner type person in my everyday life. But when it comes to my creative writing, too much organization kills the magic for me. So I will say, other book projects of mine that are in the works did not come necessarily as organically as this. I have a novel that I've been working on for a couple years now that I wrote it within about a year's time, and I'm very much, when I'm drafting, I do not edit. That is something I save for a different time, because I will start picking it apart, and then I could lose certain elements that might be important, or I might lose confidence in myself, because that is something that I definitely struggle with. So when I'm writing, I don't read over it, I just get it on the page. And so that sometimes means, for instance, with Conjure, which is one of the longer stories in this collection, I had multiple versions of it. I was working on it, and then I was like, I'm not going to read over what I wrote, but I don't know if this is working for me, and I started writing it in a different direction. And then what I always do, I put the book down for a year. That is my timeline. It gets put down for a year so that I start to forget it. So that I can get space from it, especially a book like this, with the way I wrote it, like the ferocity that I was creating it, I needed space from it. And so I take about a year off, and then I do really rigorous, I do like a rigorous round or two of revision, then I send it to some trusted friends, and then I do another round or two of revision, and then I start to decide if I think it's ready to be sent out in the world, and then this has been revised 2 or 3 times since it was accepted for publication. So I love revising. I just won't do it at the beginning.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So then I guess my next question would be, I've been told by people who are writers that the process of writing the book changes you in some way. That creative process, having that piece of labor out there makes you different. What changed you? What did you learn about yourself in writing this?
That's a great question. I mean, this is the first full-length book that I've written. So, I did have a chapbook that came out in 2020, but I had written, that has 6 stories, and 4 of them had already been written and published. And so that was more of me realizing that I had stories with common themes that I could tie together, and then I wrote one completely new story, and then I finally finished a story I had been stuck on for a couple years. And so, that was an important process for me, but this was different because in my MFA, so in my MFA program, I was supposed to write a novel as my thesis. And I started writing a novel. I, growing up, told everyone I was going to be a novelist, never written a novel, but, I was like, I'm in this program, I'm going to write a novel. And I hated the book I was writing, so I stopped. And then I ended up writing a novella, also based in New Orleans, so I guess things were happening. I wrote a novella with a short story collection. And so when I sat down to do this was my first real attempt at writing a full-length book that, even though it is stories, it can be read very much like a novel because it's all interconnected. And so I guess with this book, what I learned is how to actually stick with an idea long enough to make it into something, and learned that for me the process is really good if I dedicate myself to something and I just keep returning to it. And that's where I really learned too that the don't edit until it's done kind of thing came up for me, because I was so excited to write every day and I wasn't questioning myself, and I'm a very anxious person, so I question everything every day. And so it made me trust myself, and also gave me the confidence to lean into all of the things that I love, and I feel like this book is so deeply personal to me. Whether it's some shared experiences with characters, or it's based on figures that I love in folklore or mythology, or real life figures that I've met or I've studied. It takes place in my favorite place where I got married. There's so much of me in this book, and so that was also something that I had to learn, of how to allow those pieces to be there and then be like, oh right, and now other people are going to read this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got, I think, 2 more real questions related to the writing, and then we're going to talk about bookstore stuff.
Sounds great.
So my first question is, and it's a very generic question, and I apologize, but it's the layup, because the next question I've been told I'm a jerk for asking, so I feel like it balances. But what's the advice you would give to a young person or to an old person who wants to start writing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's one I feel like with the bookstore we get a lot, and then when they're like, oh, you're a writer, my advice is to write. I mean, reading and writing are the 2 big things you need to do. You need to be constantly consuming what is out there, and find what you like reading and what you like writing, and make sure you're reading within that genre too. So I found that I loved feminist fairy tales, so I read everything I could get my hands on. So I could see what had already been done, right, because I wanted to do something different, but B, because I wanted to have, a foundation for it, as well. And also I am a writing teacher, so I firmly believe that you can't be a good writer if you're not actively reading. And then my second piece of advice is to know why you're writing. So that's the biggest thing. Yes, I have a book, I have a chapbook, that's great. I get stories published, I get nominated for things sometimes. It's all wonderful, right? But so much of being a writer and trying to be a published writer involves rejection. I receive rejection all day, every day about my writing. And no matter who you are, I mean, except maybe like Stephen King, right? Even very famous writers receive rejection. And so what I remind myself on those days where I am just, I'm feeling really low, like I would say, I went through earlier in the pandemic, which also was not a great time for this. I went through like a 9-month spell of not getting a single acceptance. I knew this book was coming out, but I didn't get a single story accepted. I was getting rejection after rejection, and it's just a difficult world we're living in right now. And I was starting to really question, everything. But then, A, my husband said some reassuring things, but because he's wonderful and very supportive. But B, I was like, well, why do I write? Do I write because I want attention? Do I write because I want to be rich and famous? Because if those are the reasons you're writing, A, it's unlikely any of those things will happen in the capacity that you think they will. I am a paid writer, right? But I'm not rich and famous, and maybe I will be one day, but I write for me because it's a part of who I am and because I genuinely enjoy doing it and I get a lot out of it. Yeah. So I try to always come back to that, why I do it.
No, great answers. And I think that the why you do it is something that doesn't get said enough, because I don't know, I'm not a writer, but I assume you're right, that you should be writing because you love to write, not because you want to become rich and famous. Although, alternatively, ¿por qué no los dos? Why not both?
Yes.
So my follow-up question, my hard question. If you had to pick an authorial doppelganger, someone you go, ooh, I write like this person, who would that be? Yeah, see that look right there. You're going, he is a jerk. That's a terrible question.
That's really hard. I know who I want to write like, but I don't know if...
I will accept, that's an acceptable answer. Okay.
So... who I'm really, because I'm working on a novel right now that I'm getting ready to submit to agents, and who I've started to be told by some beta readers, like it could go in the direction of, and I really am leaning towards, is Karen Russell.
Okay.
I love how she blends, everyday life with magical realism in such an incredible way, how she blends the mundane with the magical. And so that would be either she or Samantha Hunt, because I read Mr. Splitfoot earlier this year, and that book is so weird and creepy and violent, and I was like, okay, yeah. So I also feel like the book I'm writing is like very in line with that, or at least that's what I'm going for.
Very cool. Okay. And now, a couple questions, conversations, whatever, about being a bookstore owner. So, much like myself, I'm 32. You said earlier that you were 30. We are both young bookstore owners. What has been, and I realize, like, now we're on the record, I should have done this stuff before when you could have had deniability. I'm very sorry. But what has sort of been your experience, much like myself, growing up in an age where computers are a part of our everyday life? We order online, we do a lot of stuff online, but we're both working in an industry where it's predominantly about physical media. And I know a lot of people, when I've gone to Inner Institute, when I've gone to NABA, have been concerned, apprehensive about computers, about technology in general. What's that experience been like for you?
I am a hard anti-Kindle person.
Gotcha.
I am very much, I love the smell of books. I want to hold a book. And when the bookstore opened, when a Novel Idea opened, about 3 years ago, we had no online shop. And it was just, to this day, it's my husband and I who own the shop, and we have one employee. And so for the first year plus, it was just Alex and me working the shop 6 days a week, telling people what we thought they should read.
Yeah.
And
that's the dream.
It is the dream.
Yeah.
I get to talk about books every day. And we read really weird stuff, and people either come to the store who already read weird stuff, or they've started experimenting with weirder stuff, because I'm like, no, you have to read this Dutch horror novel because it's going to blow your mind. And so, then the pandemic happened, and, we had to adjust. We got a bookshop page. We have an online store now. And so it's been a weird thing to try to deal with. And I will say, when we first opened, we definitely had folks we don't get it as much anymore now, but people would, walk by the bookstore and be like, why do I need that? Or they'd like come take a photo of a book and be like, I'm going to get this cheaper on Amazon,
That's my favorite. That's my,
that's totally my favorite. Or when, I actually wasn't there that day, but our employee told me that someone picked up my chapbook and was like asking her about it and was like, oh, well, I'll buy this when this goes on sale. And she was like, it's the owner's book. It's never going to go on sale because it's from a micro press that makes it by hand, and the owner gets paid like $3.60 a copy. So like, she's never going to discount this book. Like, I'm so glad that she wasn't here to like, what do you like? I was like, what would I say to that person? I don't know what I would say to that person.
Yeah, it's so crazy to me. I understand that the economy's rough, times are tough for everybody. I get it. If you can do it cheaper on Amazon, it doesn't. I understand. I try really hard to be empathetic and be like, you know what? I don't know your situation. I don't know your story. It's cool. I don't love when I spend 20 minutes finding books for you and like recommending things, and then you're like, cool, I'll buy all these on Amazon. I'm like, you could buy one. Like, you could just pick one of them, mate. But it's cool. But to me, the whole, I don't know how much you guys are engaged with sort of the movement, and it's actually a really cool movement. The idea that they want to, teenagers are so much more socially active and so much more knowledgeable than I was. I don't know about you. I won't speak for you. Than I was. And they want to support independent authors. They don't want to go, traditionally published authors. Don't buy their books, buy this other indie author's book, which is great. But it's so hard, especially around the holidays when teenagers come in and they have this list of authors, and I'm like, these are all CreateSpace authors. I can't get them for you. And I wish so much that I was able, sort of like you would be able, your employee was able to explain to this person, look, like, it's a micro press. She's getting, $3.46. It's never going to go on sale. I always wish I could explain, like, look, I want to support this author. I want to bring in this book, but they're only available on CreateSpace, which is Amazon. I can't get that book. And I realize you want to avoid the big evil publishing houses. I get that, but instead you're going to support the super friendly local neighborhood Amazon? That seems, it's well intended, but
Yeah, it's so complicated, so we have a dedicated section at A Novel Idea for small press authors. Mm-hmm. And so, if we can get it, not through CreateSpace, if we can get it, going directly to the publisher, or we can do it on consignment, we will, if we think it's a good fit for the shop. And that's been really special. That was something, even before I was submitting books of my own, that was something that was integral to what we were building, because we wanted to be a community-based space. And I did an MFA locally, and I know so many friends who have, I just had one of my best friends had a book come out on Saturday with this really awesome small press that makes handmade books, awesome. And they're gorgeous. It's called Ethel Zine. So they also do a zine, and then they're a press, and they're gorgeous. But I'm going to talk to her and see if I can stock them, but it's also the challenge of, I've had friends who've had books with a super small press that they only do a print run of 50, and then the book's done, right? Mm-hmm. So it's so much more complicated, I think, than a lot of people realize, that whether it's small press or even with a larger press, or it's like a really obscure title from the past, that we are limited to how we can get them. And sometimes people will be like, oh, well, I want this book. And I'm like, we get like a 10% discount on that. So unless you want me to like super upcharge you, like, we can't do that. Or someone will be like, can you carry this zine that doesn't do wholesale? And I'm like, you do realize I'm running a business. Like, yes, I support community. Yes, I want you to come to the indie bookstore, whether it's mine or Town Book Center. Like, I want you to support these indies versus going to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever it might be. But also, I am running a business that is my, like, yes, I'm an adjunct as well and a writer, but what pays the bills, what's paying my mortgage, mm-hmm. is this small business.
Yeah, absolutely. And we run into it the same way. One of the things I try and do is, if someone's looking for something and I don't have a copy of it, I will always try and call the other local indies around me, and because we all know each other, and just go, hey, do you guys have this one? Cool, you do, awesome. I've got so-and-so going to come over there, they're going to get it from you, because, if it's not for me, at least support the brotherhood, so to speak. That way, we're all still in this.
Absolutely.
It's really rough, but I appreciate you also pointing out the discount thing, because again, it is a business. I would love, in my ideal dream world, I would have no overhead. I would have all the books that I think are great, and people would just come in, and I would be like, this book's amazing, and it was made for you, and you should have it, and they would have it, and it would be the best thing. But, I also, there's dogs I have to feed, I have to eat occasionally, and it's a real thing. So with our limited time left, I want to ask you for a weird, hopefully not too weird request, if that's okay.
Okay.
I love weird horror. I love it. It's one of my favorite things in the whole world. The store will, yell at me about it, but I sell Jonathan L. Howard, Johannes Cabal, the Necromancer all the time. I'm very much into that stuff. Can you give me like a couple of book recommendations? Can you point some stuff out for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that I there's a Dutch horror novel that I've been championing to people, and you've maybe heard of it, but Hex by Thomas Oldhavel. Mm-hmm. Have you read it?
I have not read it. I have heard of it, though.
You have to read it. So, and I think it's a really good comparison. On like the blurb on the cover, I said that it feels very reminiscent of a young Stephen King, and I think that's a really great. I think that's a huge compliment, but I also agree with it. But what I love about him too is that he is a queer author, and his ideas are just so insane. He has a book, Echo, that will soon be translated and out over here. But it takes place in an upstate New York town that has been cursed by a witch for 300 years. Ooh. And she has her eyes and her mouth sewn shut. And it's really interesting because it in part follows a group of teenage kids who, are using technology and everything. It's very current, and decide to open up her stitches on her eyes and her mouth, and literal hell breaks loose. It's funny, it's heartbreaking, it's terrifying. So I definitely recommend Hex.
I love it. Yeah.
And then I would also recommend, I've been reading some more female Latino authors this year in translations. And so one of my favorite books, which I feel like is definitely horror, but it could also fit into literary fiction, is Tender as the Flesh.
Ooh.
Have you heard about that?
I was going to say, there's one, I can't remember the name of the press. It's a small press. Their whole thing is they do like grindhouse-style books. And there's one about, it's two Latinx sisters, one of whom is a were-jaguar and also a dancer, and that's how she lures men in to kill them. It's so cool. And it's all to protect her sister, to make money. It's not that book, is it?
It's not that book,
okay,
but
cool.
Wait, what is that book?
Yeah,
Do you think
I had it. So we did a blog post. As someone who loves fantasy, horror, and sci-fi, and also recognizes that the all too true sometimes critique of that genre is, it's like old white dudes talking about magic, which is a fair critique at times. I did a whole blog post on like non-traditional horror and own voices horror, and it was on the blog post. I will look it up and email it to you after the show.
Yeah, please do.
Super good.
That sounds right up my alley.
Tender as the Flesh sounds awesome, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Tender as the Flesh is Augustina Bazterrica, if I say that correctly. It was translated by Sarah Moses. So it came out, I feel like it came out this year, but maybe it's not quite that recent. But essentially, it takes place, it's very much a dystopian novel. So there has been a virus that has made animals essentially go mad. And they become very dangerous. And so humans can no longer consume meat. And so instead, they start a new meat packing business, which is humans. So it is a book about cannibalism. It will make you extremely queasy while reading it. And it follows a white male protagonist who is the head of a meatpacking plant. But he ends up becoming a very conflicted character. And it's interesting because I read very little fiction written by men because it often makes me mad. And it's interesting because this is written by a woman, but it follows a man, and you're convinced for like half of the book. Like you keep forgetting that a woman wrote this and also that a woman translated it. But it's beautiful, it's terrifying, it's disgusting, but it also makes some really interesting reflections on animal products and consuming them, while making you also think about like cultural norms and what in times of unrest, in dire times, what we might convince ourselves is okay to survive or to keep comforts that we want. So definitely tenders the flesh. I'm telling everyone to read it. And I actually wrote a review. I forget what platform it was on, but every once in a while, I'm sure you guys get this too, you know, we'll be like, oh, we'd love for you, like booksellers, to write a little review. So I wrote one for Tenders the Flesh, and a regular reached out to me and said, oh, Christina, after that review, you know, I don't really know how I feel about a novel about cannibalism, but I need to read this. And so she bought it, and then she hated it so much. And it's not for the, talk about a murder ballad, talk about a book that's not faint for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
You know, Tender of the Flesh is not, but it was so incredible. Definitely on my top books ever, but top books this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that sounds really cool. Okay. I know it sounds weird for me to say, that sounds so cool about eating people. That's not what I mean, people of the internet. I don't think that's cool. In the real world, in the reading world, very interesting.
Right. It's like, I love watching the show Hannibal. And he makes cannibalism sexy. I mean, that show is so gorgeously shot that they do make it seem, you know, sexy. But I don't then plan on eating people. No. You know, there's an important distinction to make. Yes.
For legal reasons, we are both stating none of us would consume the flesh of other people in the real world, ever.
Of course not.
On the other hand, though, I definitely do have the Hannibal soundtrack that I play when I'm cooking, because it's pretty great.
Yes, amazing.
All right. Well, now comes the part where I normally would shamelessly plug my store, but today we're going to do it differently. I'm going to shamelessly plug my store, and you're going to shamelessly plug your store, because, again, in case any of you for some reason are just tuning in now or have missed it or have been focusing on other things, Christina also owns a bookstore, and it's local. So this is the part where I will tell you that, hey, if any of this sounded like fun and you want to get yourself a copy of Creole Conjure, not this copy, because this is my copy, but if you want to get yourself a copy, you can do that at Town Book Center in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. We're located right across the street from the Wegmans. It's a wonderful store. We're super friendly, mostly, and we love to see you. But if you go, that's too far for me, I don't want to go out there, you can always shop with us online. But if you're in downtown Philly, you shouldn't come see us. You should instead go to...
A Novel Idea on Passyunk, which is in East Passyunk, which has it has over 100 small businesses, a lot of great restaurants. It has me, who can sign copies of Creole Conjure. My husband also just designed t-shirts, because my husband designed the cover. Alex Schneider created this. He also just designed special t-shirts for it. So yeah, come on down to the shop. Either support us or Town Book Center to get your copy of Creole Conjure. And also, I have to come over to Town Book Center soon, because I've never been in person. I know it's such a weird time, but I'm like, I need to come over. Would love to meet you in person, and would also love to sign copies of my book.
I would love that. I mean, like, I was going to email you later and be like, can we be friends? I don't know anyone in this town. You guys seem cool.
Well, and now we live pretty close to each other, too. We could be real friends, and we both have dogs, and my dog is always looking for more dog friends.
My dogs are always looking for dog friends. They are ridiculous, and, I mean, they're actually sleeping. Holy cow, they're so good. All right. Well, for everyone else who's still here, thank you so much for joining us both tonight, and we'll see you guys. I don't know when I'm doing the next one of these, but I'll see you then. So thank you all, and thank you again, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.